It's great to see you all. I love doing the health chats because it gives me the opportunity to talk to people that I find very interesting, and I hope you do too. Tonight I think will be super interesting, not only because of the environment within which we're working at the moment, but also things that have been in the news as well, which we can all do without, but nevertheless they're challenges and we must deal with them. So tonight it's about the third sector, it's about the charity sector, predominantly it's about the Red Cross, and who better to tell us all about that than the Chief Executive of the British Red Cross, my guest, Michael Adams. Michael, thank you very much for joining us. I mean, you were in the NHS at one time, weren't you?
I did for my stints.
You had a proper job, yeah. Okay. Well, okay, let's go back. Where did it all start for you? You've got a bit of a burr in your accent, but you're not West Country.
No, I'm from Newcastle.
Are you really?
You've got rid of that frustrated magpie support.
You've got rid of that speech impediment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry to anybody watching in Newcastle. Yeah. Very nice to see you all in Newcastle. Yeah. So what happened? Would you go to uni? What happened? What was home like? Brothers, sisters?
Yeah, no. Very nice family. Got a younger brother. My mother was a GP and did family planning clinics and worked in the University Health Service in Newcastle, in fact. And yeah, I studied economics at Sheffield University, and then I did a master's at Oxford in economics.
Masters in economics? Blimey. What a waste of a career.
No, the funny thing is, you're so right, actually. Honestly, you spend so much time on mathematical models that have no reflection of no relationship to the real world.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just going to move that because otherwise you're going to put it up. Yeah. So, and what did you do then? Did you put an advert in saying, does anybody want to do that?
That's right. That's an overdeveloped economist. No, I worked as a management consultant with what was then Coopers & Lybrand, now PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Yes.
And spent a total of 6 years there, including doing bits of NHS work. In fact, the first, one of the early assignments I worked on was about the planning of cancer treatment services in what was then North East Thames Regional Health Authority. A real insight into...
Well, that was interesting because we thought our cancer services were good, didn't we? And it wasn't until we did the comparison with the Eurostat data that we found that actually that's not the case. I think that came as a surprise to everybody.
But also I thought was interesting then, because this was in the days before NICE, and actually part of the reason for the commissioning of that study was that fundamentally, and clinicians in the room, please forgive me, but actually in North East Thames what they used to do was give people lots of little shots of radiotherapy. But in other parts of the country, you get a few big shots of radiotherapy, and one was a lot cheaper than the other, to be frank, and they needed to rationalise services. But what was shocking at the time was the lack of, to somebody new to this, the lack of consistency of practice or accepted good practice to guide healthcare for people with the same condition.
Yeah, I remember when NICE came in, there was a huge row really about whether or not clinicians would be told what to do and they lose their clinical freedom, and there was a big row with GlaxoSmithKline over a Relenza, I think it was, wasn't it, which was a flu thing. You stuffed up your router if you thought you were going to get flu in a fortnight. So it was a useless product. That I think I'm sued. I hope Glaxo aren't watching because they don't want to get sued. But I'm sure it's a jolly fine product if used appropriately, and other cures are, I think. So you rationalising of the cancer stuff, that was before the cancer czar. The cancer czar came a bit later on.
I think so, yeah. All of that.
Mike Richards came later.
Yes,
yeah.
much later. No, much later. This is the. I know I look very young, but this is the second half of the 80s.
Yes.
The great thing about that part of my career in management consultancy was the range of things I could work on. At that time, you could move from, airport planning to health, to go and look at the economics of a water project in southern Africa, to, there's a whole range of stuff that you could actually go and look at and learn very, very quickly about how a whole range of sectors worked, and that was incredibly exciting.
I mean, I think management consultants get a bad rap, don't they? I mean, everybody kind of dismisses the big six and it's a fix, and they come in and they charge the earth and all the rest of it. Do you think we get value from consultants?
Well, I'll tell you what I do think, actually. I think the key to getting value from a consultant is to be a good client. It's all about actually the client having some sense of what it is they're looking for. Too often, I've seen it even in our own organisation at times, is that you see it a lot though as a consultant, is people they just hire a consultant. They don't actually know what it is they're trying to look at, and therefore how to make best use of the advice and support they're actually getting. So sometimes you have failed consultancy assignments that are really to do with client failure, but actually going to get described as the consultant who's failed to deliver a solution or whatever it is.
Well, I mean, I think that's probably true, really, in the Lansley reforms above all others. I mean, they had a cull of managers and then introduced this unbelievably complex, labyrinthine change to the platform of healthcare. And then we all wondered why the bill for the Big Six went through the roof, because there weren't the people around to do the job. That's the other thing, isn't it? Having enough staff.
Well, I mean, there's two main reasons to hire consultants. One is you don't have three. One, you don't have the people. Secondly, you need the advice. Or thirdly, you know what you should be doing, but you actually need somebody else to give you the advice in order to convince the other stakeholders, the board, or whoever it is that about what needs to be done.
Yeah. So from there, is that when you came into the NHS?
No. What happened then is that during that time I spent a couple of years overseas as well. I worked in Swaziland as an economist in the Department of Economic Planning. Then went back into management consultancy. So it's all within that 6-year period.
Just Swaziland. Where's Swaziland?
Swaziland is Southern Africa.
Oh, I know it's in Africa, but which bit of Africa?
Southern Africa. It's squeezed in between South Africa and Mozambique.
Oh, right. So that's there. So it's about 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A bit further.
What's it like?
It was. I had an absolute blast there. So I worked in the Department of Economic Planning, advising government on, again, infrastructure projects, that kind of thing, water projects, electricity, dams, that kind of thing, housing.
How does a country like that survive? Because it doesn't have any industry. Does it export much?
No, I mean those. Lesotho, Swaziland, and to some extent Botswana, although they've got diamonds, which kind of helps. Actually rely on migrant labour going into South Africa traditionally, working in the mines, and then remittances are a huge part of the income.
Right.
But then what they were also was, which is a fascinating time, because again it was pre the release of Mandela. Actually, they were also tax havens for businesses, northern businesses that wanted to do business in Southern Africa to supply the South African market, but would be able to invest. We had one of the biggest tax earners in Swaziland was actually the Coca-Cola factory, because it was so profitable, and then they bottled it and then flogged it into South Africa, which is within the customs union.
Like the Liechtenstein of Africa. How interesting.
Yeah, it was an absolutely fascinating time.
And there's a lot of poverty though, isn't there?
Yeah, poverty, HIV. There was conflict in Mozambique, huge influx of refugees, the beginnings of the HIV crisis, a kind of mixed political system of, on the one hand, apparently elected parliament, but on the other hand, a king who actually owned a lot of the land. And one of my claims to fame is I taught the King of Swaziland economics for 6 months. Not to much effect, I'm afraid. He'd failed his O levels at Royal Shrewsbury School, and then he came back.
Tough school.
No, exactly. And I was asked to try and teach him some economics in the rest of my role.
And it took 6 months to...
Well, he then nationalised land and bought aircraft and got lots of wives, so always did the most.
Sounds good to me. This has been my life. Okay. So, and then what did you do then?
Sorry, after that, I just realised that I just wasn't enjoying it. It was getting more and more technical, the work I was doing, and I genuinely wanted to do something I believed in. And I just saw a job advertised with the Red Cross to get involved in setting up longer-term development partnerships with the British Red Cross. This was my first period with the British Red Cross, and that's what I did. I went and set up long-term programs. I took a huge pay cut. I mean, I get very well paid now, but I took a huge pay cut at that time to go and do that because I just wanted to do something I believed in.
And where did you do it?
Well, based out of London, but then we built partnerships, some of which we've still got actually with places, Bangladesh Red Crescent, the Ethiopian Red Cross, Lesotho Red Cross, trying to help them to think, because the way the Red Cross works is there's 190 Red Cross and Red Crescent societies around the world, 17 million volunteers. We're all signed up to the same set of principles around humanity, impartiality and neutrality. So the key, and even if you look at Syria now, we may get to that, Syrian Arab Red Crescent is the main provider of support in Syria to the people who need help. So they are local institutions with their own volunteer base. So the challenge is, how do you help them to have the capacity to be able to respond when the emergencies come along?
So you strengthen their indigenous management. Okay, fine. And then at what point did you go and work with the PCT? That must have been about
so I spent
90s something?
Yeah, so I spent 10 years with the British Red Cross the first time around, did a mixture of, did the international work for 5 years, and then I did some UK work for another 5 years, and then just personal circumstances, to be honest, we had young kids, and I realised that we wanted to live outside London for a period, and I saw a job advertised in The Guardian with one of the new primary care trusts. And one of the interesting things about the interesting things about the voluntary sector is, or charity sector, is that while we're a large organisation, actually there aren't that many large charities. In fact, there's a big tail of small charities. And I just thought, well, actually, think of the career development opportunities there must be in the NHS with all these large organisations, 150 organisations or more the size of the British Red Cross. So applied for a job, knew very little about health. I believed in the NHS, as I'm sure we all do, but applied for a job as a director of planning, which then morphed into a director of commissioning in a primary care trust in Gloucestershire, which we'd also never been to, and so had 3 years in a primary care trust trying to make sense of that world.
There weren't primary care trusts in the beginning, were
there were groups.
The primary care groups, weren't they? And then we realised they were all too dinky-do and too small.
And they still were.
Had to merge, and even 150 was probably too small.
Yeah, I mean, and I think actually just at that point there were 300 primary care trusts, and so that was in the late. When would that be? So that would be in the 90s.
Mid to late 90s.
Yeah, and every job I've done, I've just learned so much. I'm still learning now, and that's what I love about the roles I play. And I learned so much in that time in the primary care trust about, and came to admire some of the leaders within it, within the NHS, about how they get things done in this sort of very difficult environment. But also I learned a lot about power dynamics, because we were in a dysfunctional health and social care economy. There were 3 primary care trusts. We were the one that was completely broke. You had an all-powerful hospital trust that became a foundation trust.
Which one was that?
Gloucestershire Hospital Trust.
Oh, yes.
We would be called down to the Strategic Health Authority for our ritual meeting every week to explain why we hadn't introduced car parking charges or something. But also about all of that stuff around demand management and trying to get those schemes to work, but in a context in which, which we still can see it at times, but about where so much is dependent on the goodwill of the leaders within the health and social care economy to want to do the right thing, by people and patients,
such an interesting
and by each other.
Because over the years I've interviewed hundreds of leaders really in the health service, and at every iteration that you get, I was around for the Griffiths report, which is a really long time ago, but people who were good during the Griffiths years were good in the Thatcher years, and the people who were good in the Thatcher years were good in the Blair years. There's always, Sam Etherington, you must know. Yes. Sam has got a GP surgery in the East End, and it's a GP surgery in the middle of a garden centre with a coffee shop, somewhere, he's in there. Yeah. But he's made a success of everything. Andrew Morris from Frimley Park has made a success of various iterations of healthcare in hospitals. And you see it all the time. There are some people who just do it, aren't they?
Yeah.
But what is that? How do they do that?
Well, I think, there is an irony, because during that time, I took part in a King's Fund leadership development CEO development program with people that, including Mel Pickup, who you met last week or whenever it was. Yeah. And what I came to do is to really admire the leaders who were able to get things done. And there's something, and there's so much, leadership development going on for NHS leaders in emotional intelligence, political intelligence, about how to operate, without authority, systems leadership, all of that stuff. And yet, when it comes to it, it's somehow not valued, and you need people who can hold on to the end point, which is the person. And they may not even be a patient yet. That's the point. They may not be an NHS patient, other than their GP practice or whatever. But that actually you hold on to the person that you're trying, whose life, who wants agency, the fashionable word of the moment, who wants to be able to choose how they live their life. And obviously if they get sick, that's a problem. And actually it's how the leaders in those health systems really operate together, focused around that person while negotiating all of their individual budget constraints.
But it's as seldom holistic as that, is it? I mean, the systems, certainly PCGs offered this sort of new nirvana, didn't they, of, you know, local people commissioning local services from local blah blah, you know, local. And then we had Lansley's No Decision About Me Without Me. The focus, we've always tried to do that. I mean, Florence Nightingale wrote about the importance of the person and agency, but somehow or other we get defeated. But is it the size, do you think, that just defeats us?
Well, I think there is something about size, which is this inevitable tension between localness and economies of scale.
Yeah. Let me just roll. Sorry to interrupt you, but let me roll you back a bit. I mean, PCTs really were there for commissioning writ large, weren't they? Contracting, that was the big thing.
It was contracting.
And the logic behind that was that, like the high street, competition improves quality and gets a handle on cost. And in any other part of the economy, that works. And we thought we could do it. It started in the Thatcher reforms and then got multiplied. And we thought we could do it in healthcare, but it didn't work. And I don't know why it didn't work, because it defeats normal business logic. As a big knob of economics, you know about these things.
I don't think there was ever a big knob of economics, I'm certainly not now. But but it's the reason. I think that it's simple. It works when you're commissioning. It can work when you're commissioning hip replacements. But if 70% of bed days are taken up by people with multiple conditions,
Yeah.
it doesn't work. And even the BMJ was writing a few weeks ago about how the NHS has become too specialised. And you used to have a shoulder specialist. Yeah. Now you have somebody who's a specialist in a bit of a shoulder.
Yeah, Mancunian Medic, I think that was really
right.
I read it. It was really interesting.
Really interesting. And that's so. You think about what that means for the person. Nobody's. All of these handoffs between specialists, and yet I just think if you step back and you were designing this from scratch, you simply wouldn't do it the way we do it at the moment. You'd start to root it in the actual challenge we're facing, which is that that people start off well. It's how we keep them well. How do you nip things in the bud? How do you stop loneliness becoming a chronic problem, which means they go to their GP or whatever? If they fall, how do you get them back on their feet again quickly? You work it up all of the way from actually what is necessary to keep them well and independent. And you then acknowledge that with an ageing population, there are more and more people with multiple conditions, which is the drive of the cost within the system.
But maybe you put your finger right there, because if again we draw the lessons of economics and business, because I think there's a reasonable parallel between business and public services, because they have to be governed in a business-like way. In a business, you segment your business, don't you? So, for example, Topshop, you know what you're going to get in Topshop, you know what the customers will look like, vaguely their age bracket, their disposable income, you know who you're dealing with, and your Marks and Spencers, you're dealing with whoever still goes to Marks and Spencers. So you know who your market is. In the NHS, of course, we open the front door. And Topshop, Marks and Spencers, everybody comes, and we can't segment our business, and so we can't do the tailoring of the service.
No, and it isn't interesting that the flash stores like Harvey Nicks or whatever. Now they have expert shoppers, don't they? Who accompany because they want you to buy lots of things.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't need a pair of jeans, you need a T-shirt, you need a coat, you need whatever. And actually, that's what a lot of people who are using lots of stuff in the NHS need, isn't it? They need a whole bunch of different inputs.
Well, we've had the personal trainer thing, which didn't work. But the segmenting thing really interests me. If you look at Australia, for example, they've got the Department for Health and Ageing. So they've carved out ageing and they offer completely different services. I mean, it is crazy to send an ambulance for a little old lady with a UTI, park her in A&E, the most confusing, mind-boggling place you can think of, and then put her in bed for a couple of days. Social services can't get her home, and then wonder why she can't walk.
No, and she's losing 5% of muscle strength every day.
Yeah, I mean, you and I can sit and talk about it. It's just we go back to PCT days. I suppose really PCTs were more interested, weren't they, in volumes? How could they get all their hip operations done less 5%, that kind of thing.
And I don't think we were really doing commissioning. Actually, what we were doing was we were doing some pathway work, which was worthy in itself, not just worthy, it was useful in itself. And we were doing a lot of contracting, trying to, but of course the other market failure is at the end of the day, notwithstanding a bit of choice, we were dealing fundamentally with one supplier, which is the dominant hospital trust. So yes, a few people in the south of the patch could go down to Swindon, but actually you're dealing with a dominant supplier, and actually that's not the way in which to...
Well, the approaches are interesting. I mean, I live in Surrey, and I've got fabulous Frimley Park, I've got Ashford and St Peters, I've got Royal Surrey, and blah, blah. So it doesn't matter where, I can nip around, and that's fine. But of course, even from the time when I was the chairman of the Health Authority, we wanted to close one of them because there wasn't enough money in the health economy to keep them all open, and they're still having an argy-bargy about it now, all those years later.
Yes.
So you do get those two conflicting pressures.